cold. That was the first thing I felt as I stepped into the Collins estate. Not the chill of the air, but the icy stillness, the coldness of a house that once overflowed with laughter, now frozen into nothing but memories. I am Sophie Collins, the youngest child and the one who had stayed away the longest, returning home after nearly 7 years of absence. I didn't want to come back. Truly, I didn't. But my father's death, Richard Collins, pulled me back like a string he still controlled, even from the grave. The grand living room loomed before me, the walls lined with formal family portraits. The familiar scent of oak wood and antique polish lingered in the air. And then I saw them. Emily, my oldest sister, stood by the window, her posture rigid as always, dressed in a flawless black suit without a single wrinkle. Nathan, the middle child, lounged by the bar, idly swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. It had been 5 years since I'd last seen them, but somehow Nathan looked like he'd aged 10. "Sophie," Emily said with a curt nod, her voice colder than ice. That was it. No hug, no greeting. She had always been like that, stern, composed, and disciplined. Exactly the kind of heir my father had groomed. Well, well, the little runaway finally returns. Nathan smirked before downing his drink. I thought you were too busy wandering the world to bother. The familiar sting of mockery. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be branded the family's traitor. Good to see you both, I said, keeping my voice as even as possible. Now was not the time to lose my temper. Not yet. Mr. Johnson, the family attorney, a man whose face resembled a professional sympathy card, entered the room carrying a heavy leather briefcase. He glanced at the three of us, standing apart like lonely islands, and sighed quietly. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know this is a difficult time, but we must proceed with the reading of Mr. Richard Collins's will." And just like that, it began. From the very first lines, I knew this would not be an ordinary reading. Then again, nothing about my father had ever been ordinary. Emily Collins, Mr. Johnson announced, inherits 60% of Collins Enterprises' assets, along with the CEO position. Emily gave a slight nod, unsurprised. She had always been the obvious choice, not the perfect child, the ideal heir. Nathan Collins, Johnson continued, inherits 30% of the shares and management of Collins Technologies. Nathan's jaw tightened. Collins Technologies. The failing subsidiary my father had banished him to after their explosive argument 4 years ago, a cruel gift dressed up as responsibility. And Sophie Collins? I held my breath. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a modest sum, enough for my father to ease whatever guilt he felt about erasing me from this family. Inherits the remaining 10% of the shares, a key found in Mr. Richard's private safe, and a sealed letter. The room fell silent. Johnson handed me a small, aged brass key and a thick, carefully sealed envelope. They felt heavier in my hand than they should have. "That's it?" Nathan suddenly shot to his feet, his voice trembling with anger. "After everything I've done? Collins Technologies? You know it's bleeding money, Johnson." "That was Mr. Richard's final decision," Johnson said, his tone unwavering. "So that's how it is," Nathan growled, turning to Emily, his face flushed with fury. "What did you do to sway the old man, huh? How do you sleep at night knowing you manipulated a dying man?" "I didn't manipulate anyone," Emily replied coldly. "I did what was necessary for this family, while you were busy drinking and throwing money around." "Responsibility?" Nathan let out a bitter laugh. "Or were you just trying to become his perfect clone? Manipulation and control. The Collins way, right?" I stood there, gripping the key and letter tightly, watching the two people I once loved tear each other apart like wounded animals. "And you," Nathan suddenly turned on me. "How dare you come back after abandoning the family? For the money? Or just to watch the fireworks?" I didn't abandon anyone, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I chose a different path, one where I didn't have to constantly prove my worth. Right, Sophie the free spirit, Emily chimed in, her smile dripping with disdain. Drifting from place to place, never committing to anything. An artist without a single notable work. What do you even want from this inheritance? You don't even know how the company works. Her words sliced like knives. But I had grown used to them. It was why I left in the first place, 7 years ago. I didn't come for the money, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I came because, despite everything, he was still my father. Mr. Johnson cleared his throat, trying to cut through the storm of resentment. There's one more condition in the will, he announced. We all turned to him, curiosity momentarily outweighing our anger. Mr. Richard requested that all 3 heirs must hold on to their shares for at least 1 year before they can sell. During that year, they are required to serve together on the company's executive board. Silence crushed the room. Then Nathan burst out laughing, a dry, hollow sound. Perfect. Even in death, he's still trying to control us. Emily fixed her cold gaze on me. Sophie doesn't know the first thing about running a business. She'll ruin everything. You think I want to work with you? I snapped. After everything? This condition is non-negotiable, Johnson said firmly. If any of you refuse, your inheritance will be donated to charity. And that's when everything truly exploded. Accusations flew. Old wounds ripped open, buried resentments erupted to the surface. Emily accused me of never loving the family. Nathan blamed Emily for every bad decision ever made. And me, I simply stood there, clutching the key and the letter, wondering why our father had done this to us. As I walked out of the Collins estate that day, one thing was painfully clear. There was no family left to save, only broken pieces and bitter memories. But the key in my hand, and the sealed letter, they whispered of a secret that might just change everything. If you're still following this story, stay tuned. The truth behind the old key and the mysterious letter from a dead father might just turn the Collins siblings' world upside down. Will they find a way to heal, or will Richard Collins's legacy tear them apart forever? I left the estate carrying a heavy sadness and a strange feeling that this was far from the end. On the bus ride back to my small apartment on the outskirts of the city, I couldn't stop staring at the old brass key in my hand. It held no markings, no tag, no number, no clue. Just an ordinary, time-worn key. But why had my father left it to me? And the letter, sealed so carefully with a red wax stamp and his signature, what did it mean? 3 days passed after the reading of the will, and I still couldn't bring myself to open the letter. Every time I picked it up, my hands trembled. I was terrified of what might lie inside. A final condemnation? A bitter farewell? Or worse, cold, detached instructions that felt like a punch to the gut? On the 4th night, after half a bottle of wine and a desperate need for courage, I found myself digging through an old box filled with the few keepsakes I had of my mother. She had died when I was just 8 years old, and my father had rarely spoken of her after that. But now, a memory stirred, a thread pulling me back to the past. "The house in the suburbs," I whispered, flipping through the old photos. And then I found it. A picture of my mother standing in front of a small blue house with a white picket fence. The house where she grew up. The place where my parents had first met. It couldn't be a coincidence. The key must unlock something there. The next morning I stood before the old house on the outskirts of Riverdale. It was much smaller, much older than in the picture, paint peeling, wild grass choking the yard. No one had lived there for a long time. Hands trembling, I fit the brass key into the front door's lock. It slid in perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me all along. Inside, the air was thick with dust and old memories. Furniture sat beneath ghostly, white sheets. I wandered from room to room, brushing my fingers along the faded walls, feeling the faint presence of my mother. This was where she had once laughed, dreamed, lived, before my father ever entered her world. In the master bedroom, a large mirror caught my eye. When I looked into it, I gasped. I looked so much like her. The same eyes, the same smile, and maybe the same free spirit. But then something strange in the reflection caught my attention. A faint, uneven line on the wall behind me. Turning around, I saw it. A hidden door, expertly concealed, visible only from just the right angle. Heart pounding, I pushed. The wall shifted, revealing a small secret room, an old office. And there, on a dusty desk, sat a safe. I knew instantly that the key belonged there. Opening the safe, I found a small wooden box filled with letters, a few pieces of my mother's jewelry, and another letter. This one was also from my father, but unlike the first, it had a handwritten note across the envelope, "Open only when you are ready to forgive." I sat down on the dusty floor, staring at the two letters, feeling like I was standing at a crossroads. One path led to painful truth, the other to eternal ignorance. Pulling out my phone, I acted before fear could make me hesitate. I called Emily. "Sophie?" she answered, surprised. "What's going on?" "I found something," I said, voice shaking, "at Mom's old house. I think we should all see it together." There was a long silence. Then Emily said, "Why would you want to share this with me?" "Because it's not just about me," I answered honestly. "It's about all of us." "I found another letter, Emily, and it says, 'Open only when you are ready to forgive.'" A heavy sigh. "Where are you?" "I'll come." I texted Nathan next. He was more skeptical. "Probably just another one of the old man's mind games," he muttered bitterly over the phone. "Another way to control us from beyond the grave." "Maybe," I admitted. "But if you don't come, you'll never know." After a long pause, he agreed, grudgingly. 2 hours later, for the first time in years, the three Collins siblings sat together again, in a dusty, forgotten room, in a house full of ghosts. The tension was so thick, it was almost suffocating. Emily perched stiffly on the only chair, her black hair pulled tight, eyes wary. Nathan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, face carved in stone. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the two letters laid out before me. "So," Emily said, her voice clipped. "You found a secret room and another letter. What exactly does this mean?" "Means Dad left Sophie some grand melodrama." Nathan snorted, rolling his eyes. "Classic Collins." "Which letter should we open first?" I asked, ignoring him. "The one you received at the will reading," Emily decided. "Ever the commanding one. It might explain everything." I picked up the first letter, hands trembling as I broke the seal. The room was dead silent, except for the soft crinkle of paper. "Read it aloud," Nathan said quietly. I drew in a deep breath and began, "My dearest Sophie, if you are reading this, then I am no longer in this world, and you have found your way to this house, just as I had hoped. This house is not just where your mother grew up. It is where I found the only true love of my life." I paused, my throat tightening painfully. Emily looked away, blinking rapidly. Nathan closed his eyes as if willing himself not to remember. I continued, "You were always the one who understood me best, Sophie, though you may not think so. You have your mother's free spirit, her keen eyes, and a heart that bows to nothing but the truth. That is why I entrusted this task to you." Tears blurred my vision, but I pressed on. "There is another letter, Sophie, a letter meant for all three of you. But it must only be opened when you are truly ready to listen, when you can look at each other not as rivals, but as siblings, as a family. This is not a test. It is my final attempt to mend the greatest failure of my life, letting you drift apart. Find your way back to each other, my dear girl. Please, try. With all my love, Father." When I finished, the room sat frozen in silence. I looked up and was stunned to see Emily's eyes glistening with tears, and Nathan's harsh mask had softened. "So, what does he want us to do?" Emily whispered. "Forgive? Just forget everything that's happened?" "Maybe not forget," I said quietly. "Maybe understand." Nathan walked over to the window, staring out at the overgrown garden. For years, I convinced myself he didn't care, that he only cared about the company, about perfection, about Emily. He turned to us, voice raw. But what if that wasn't true? Emily rose and stepped closer to the second letter. The one with the words, "Open only when you are ready to forgive." "Are we ready?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I looked at her. At the sister I once idolized, before life and ambition built walls between us. Then, at Nathan, the brother who once pushed me on a swing for hours, before anger swallowed his light. "I don't know if we're ready to forgive," I said truthfully, "but maybe we're ready to listen." Nathan gave a slow, hesitant nod. Emily, after a long moment, nodded too. I reached for the second letter. As I broke the seal, a photograph slipped out, 3 young men, arms around each other, grinning ear to ear. One was clearly our father, young and full of life. The second looked familiar, and the third, "That's Charles Wilson?" Emily gasped. Charles Wilson, our father's greatest rival, the man he spoke of with nothing but contempt. But in this photo, they looked like best friends. Holding the letter now felt like holding a live wire. Whatever it contained, it would shatter everything we thought we knew about our father, our family, our legacy. I looked at Emily and Nathan. They both nodded, and I began to read. "To my dearest children, Emily, Nathan, and Sophie, if you are reading this letter together, then perhaps the time has come for me to finally tell you the truth, a truth I have hidden for nearly 4 decades. I paused and looked up. Emily and Nathan were both visibly shaken. Charles Wilson, so the man our father had painted as his lifelong enemy, had once been his closest friend? The photo you are holding was taken in the summer of 1982, when I was just 22 years old. 3 ambitious young men with dreams of changing the world. From left to right, myself, Frank Miller, now resting in peace, and Charles Wilson, not my rival, as you have always believed, but my best friend." I continued reading. Together we founded our first company, WMC Technologies, a small startup where each of us held equal shares. Charles was the visionary, Frank was the strategist, and I was the executor, the one who built relationships and sold the dream. The first 2 years were brutal. We worked 20-hour days, slept under our desks, and fed ourselves on dreams alone. But then Charles developed a revolutionary data processing algorithm. It wasn't just an innovation, it was the future. Then came the offer, a massive buyout proposal from a major corporation. Charles and Frank wanted to refuse. They believed we could build something greater. But I saw a shortcut to success. I paused again, my heart hammering in my chest. I could see now where this story was heading, and it terrified me. "You okay?" Emily asked softly, her hand resting on my shoulder. A tender gesture from her, the first in years. I nodded and went on. "I did the unforgivable. Behind their backs, I negotiated the sale. I forged their signatures on the contracts. I pocketed the money and used it to found Collins Enterprises. By the time Charles and Frank discovered the truth, it was too late. Their attempts to sue me failed. The contracts had been ironclad. Frank never recovered. He drowned himself in alcohol and died a few years later. And Charles vowed to destroy me. He spent his entire life building his empire in bitter rivalry against mine. Every success I achieved, every dollar I earned, every ounce of prestige that the Collins name enjoyed, it was all built on betrayal. Nathan abruptly stood up and turned toward the window, his shoulders trembling. I wasn't sure if he was shaking with anger or heartbreak. Emily sat frozen, her face pale as marble. I continued, my voice quivering. Collins Enterprises is not the grand legacy you believe it to be. It is a monument to my greatest sin, and every day, watching you grow up under its shadow, I was tormented by the knowledge that your futures were built upon my lie. Emily, my brilliant daughter, I placed a terrible burden upon your shoulders. I taught you that success was everything, that power was the measure of your worth. I taught you the wrong lessons I had learned. Nathan, my brave son, you always saw through me. You sensed the falsehood. Your rebellion was a natural response to a world built on lies. I pushed you away because I feared you would uncover the truth. And Sophie, the free spirit of our family, you chose your own path. You escaped the shadow of Collins Enterprises, and for that, you may be the only one of my children truly free of my sins. Tears streamed down my face as I read. Emily was openly crying now, something I hadn't seen since our mother's funeral. Even Nathan, always so guarded, wiped at his eyes. Now that I am gone, I want to make amends, even if it is too late. The will that Mr. Johnson read to you was not my true will. It was a test, my final effort to see if you could overcome the divisions between you. The truth is, I created a trust, the Collins Family Trust. It holds all my assets, including controlling shares in Collins Enterprises, and it will be passed to the three of you, on one condition. You must manage it together. You must use it not only to maintain the company, but to make amends for the wrongs I committed. A significant portion of the annual profits must be devoted to charity, especially to organizations supporting children and education, the values your mother cherished most. If you fail to work together, if you cannot heal the fractures between you, the entire fortune will be transferred to Charles Wilson, who may do with it as he sees fit. This is not a punishment. It is my final attempt to do what is right. The room was silent as I read the final lines. I lived my life under the shadow of one terrible decision. Do not let the same happen to you. Find forgiveness, not just for me, but for each other. Build a new legacy, one built on love, not deceit. I love you more than anything in this world. Richard Collins. I folded the letter and placed it on the dusty floor between us. None of us spoke for a long time. We just sat there, allowing the truth to slowly seep into the cracks of our broken understanding, washing away everything we had once believed about our father, our family, and ourselves. So it was all built on a lie, Emily finally said, her voice hollow. Our company, our wealth, our so-called legacy, all of it. Maybe that's why he was never really happy, Nathan said quietly. Why he worked like a man haunted by something he could never outrun. So what now? I asked, looking at them both. Do we reach out to Charles Wilson? No, Emily said quickly, regaining a bit of her old resolve. Not yet. We need time to process this, to understand what it means. You think we can do it? Nathan asked, not with his usual cynicism, but with rare, vulnerable honesty. Work together? After everything? Emily looked down at her hands for a long moment. I don't know, she said, but I know one thing. I don't want Collins Enterprises to stand for betrayal anymore. I looked at my sister, this woman who had always seemed so distant, so untouchable, and for the first time, I saw her not as a rival, but as someone just as wounded as I was. I think we can try, I said softly. Not for father, not for the money, for us, to break the cycle. Nathan was silent for a moment. Then he walked over and sat down beside us. For the first time in years, the three Collins siblings sat together, not as competitors, but as a family. "Dad was right about one thing," Nathan said. "I always knew something was wrong. I just never imagined it was this." Emily reached out and hesitantly took our hands, the first real gesture of connection from her in almost a decade. "We have time," she said. "Johnson won't reveal the real trust arrangements until we tell him we're ready." And then, something I never expected happened. Nathan, the one who had sworn he would never forgive Emily, suddenly pulled her into a hug. Emily stiffened at first, then slowly melted into it, hugging him back. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all the cruel words, for all the years of anger." Tears streamed down Emily's face. "No, I'm the one who should be sorry. I was so arrogant, so desperate to make Father proud that I forgot what truly matters." They turned to me, and before I could react, I was pulled into the hug too. We cried together, three broken siblings, finally finding a way to begin healing. That night, in our mother's old house, we stayed up until dawn, not as heirs, not as competitors, but as brother and sisters, sharing memories, sharing pain, sharing dreams long buried. Emily confessed the crushing loneliness she had felt as the golden child. Nathan spoke of years spent sabotaging himself, trying to prove he didn't need anyone. And I shared the fear that had haunted me my entire life, that I was never enough to belong. By sunrise, we were different. Not healed, not yet, but healing. "So," Emily said, gazing out the window at the first light of morning, "what do we do about the Collins family trust?" Nathan smiled, a real smile, not the bitter ones I had grown so used to. "I have a few ideas." I looked at them both, and for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. "I think we can do this," I said. "I think we can build something new." The Collins siblings, who had arrived at this house as strangers, left it as family. Not a perfect family, but one willing to fight for something better. Our story wasn't over. It was just beginning, a new beginning, built not on lies, but on truth. Not on fear, but on love. Stay tuned to discover how the Collins siblings face their ultimate test. Will they have the courage to truly change the fate of their family? Or will old wounds tear them apart once again? 1 year later, I stood backstage at the Grand Auditorium, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears. Outside, more than 500 people were waiting: investors, partners, employees, and especially the beneficiaries of the Elizabeth Collins Foundation. Today marked the 1-year anniversary of Wilson Miller Collins, and I, Sophie Collins, was about to step up to the podium. "You okay?" Emily asked, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Gone was the stiff business suit. Today she wore a soft blue sweater, her hair flowing naturally around her face. "You look a little pale." "I just hate public speaking," I admitted, clutching my speech tightly in my hand. "Our little sister?" Nathan teased as he walked over, balancing 2 cups of water. "The same girl who convinced Charles Wilson to join our advisory board? The one who presented our education initiative before the United Nations? That Sophie Collins afraid of a little crowd?" I couldn't help but laugh. Nathan was different now, his eyes brighter, his smile genuine. The bitterness and exhaustion that once clouded him were gone. "This isn't just any crowd," I said. "This is our milestone, our first year." Emily wrapped her arm around me. "And we've come a long way. We truly had. 1 year might not seem long, but for the Collins siblings, it had been nothing short of a revolution. With Charles Wilson's guidance and a brilliant legal team, we had transformed Collins Enterprises into Wilson Miller Collins Technologies. The original algorithm, developed by Charles and Frank 4 decades ago, had been updated and expanded into a new, groundbreaking data processing technology. A technology designed not just for profit, but for social good. Emily, with her integrity and leadership skills, had steered the monumental transition. She faced opposition from the old board, from shareholders obsessed with quarterly earnings, from skeptics everywhere. But she wasn't the same rigid, cold woman anymore. She led with empathy and vision. This company was built on a lie, she had declared in her first board meeting, but we will rebuild it on the foundation of truth. Nathan, with his creativity and adaptability, launched the Horizon program, an initiative to train young people from disadvantaged backgrounds in technology and entrepreneurship. He once told me he saw himself in those kids, bright minds overlooked, desperate for a second chance. "Maybe that's why I was born a Collins," he said one night as we shared drinks after work. "Not to become a replica of Dad, but to learn from his mistakes and do something better." And me, Sophie Collins, the runaway, I found my purpose in the Elizabeth Collins Foundation. Through my love of storytelling and art, I developed education programs for children across the country, focusing especially on underserved communities. And now, here we were, about to step onto a stage, not as strangers, not as rivals, but as a true family. "Good evening, everyone," Emily began, her voice steady, warm. "Thank you for joining us in celebrating the first anniversary of Wilson Miller Collins Technologies and the Elizabeth Collins Foundation." She scanned the audience and paused as her gaze fell on the front row, where Charles Wilson sat, a look of peaceful pride on his aging face. Next to him was an empty seat, holding a single white rose, a tribute to Frank Miller, who wasn't there to witness this moment. "This journey hasn't been easy," Emily continued. "When the three of us decided to tell the truth about the origins of Collins Enterprises, many said we were crazy, that we would destroy our family's legacy, that the company would collapse, that investors would flee." She smiled gently, and maybe, in a way, they were right. The old legacy is gone, but from its ashes, something better, something truer, has risen. Nathan stepped up next, taking the microphone. "Over the past year," he said, "the Horizon program has trained over 500 students from low-income communities. 80% have either secured jobs in tech or launched their own businesses. This isn't charity. This is empowerment. This is opportunity." Then it was my turn. I took a deep breath and moved to the microphone. "The Elizabeth Collins Foundation, named after our mother, has established 5 community education centers this year," I said. "We've awarded over 3,000 scholarships to underprivileged children, and we've built a comprehensive arts program to nurture creativity and confidence in overlooked communities." I looked out into the crowd and saw the faces of the children we had helped, wide, curious eyes, bright smiles brimming with potential. "But our greatest success," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "isn't measured in numbers or buildings. It's in the small moments, when a child finishes reading their first book, when a young adult lands their first job, when a community comes together to build something new." We stood together, shoulder to shoulder. Emily spoke again. "And today," she announced, "we have a very special announcement." She smiled, her voice filled with pride. "Today, Wilson Miller Collins Technologies is proud to declare that the original algorithm, the foundation of everything, will be released as open-source technology." A wave of applause rippled through the hall. Charles Wilson stood, tears streaming down his weathered face. This was the moment he'd waited nearly half a century for. The work he and Frank had dreamed of was finally free, finally recognized. After the ceremony, the three of us slipped away to a quiet corner of a nearby park. Not a boardroom, not a conference hall. Just a patch of grass beneath the stars. "You think Mom would be proud?" Emily asked, gazing up at the sky. "Definitely," I said, squeezing her hand. "She always believed we could be better than our past." "And Dad?" Nathan asked quietly. Would he be proud? We were silent for a long time. "I think he would be at peace," Emily finally said, finally free from the secrets he carried for so long. 3 weeks later, we visited our father's grave. The first time we stood there together since the funeral, we laid fresh flowers and a framed copy of the original Algorithm, now publicly credited to Charles Wilson and Frank Miller. "We did it, Dad," Emily whispered. "Not the way you planned, but the right way." "We found our own path," Nathan added. "And we found each other," I finished. As we turned to leave, I glanced back one last time. Under the gentle spring sun, Dad's headstone seemed to glow. And for a brief moment, I could almost see him smiling. The Collins family had traveled a long road, through betrayal and secrets, rifts and pain, toward healing and renewal. We were no longer prisoners of the past, no longer defined by our father's sins. Instead, we had become the architects of our own future. Emily now spent Sunday mornings learning to play the piano, a passion she had long buried under ambition. Nathan found love. A wonderful woman named Claire, who didn't care about the Collins name or fortune, only the man he had become. And me? I finally started writing again, stories about family, about forgiveness, about beginning again. Every week, we gathered for family dinners, a tradition our mother once began, now resurrected. Sometimes Charles Wilson joined us, sharing stories of those early days, of Frank, and even of a young Richard Collins we never really knew. The true legacy of the Collins family was never a company or a trust. It was the lesson that it's never too late to change, to heal, to forgive, that our past mistakes don't have to dictate our future, and that even after years of pain and misunderstanding, family, real family, can find its way back home. As night fell over the city, I stood by the window of my new apartment, gazing at the glittering lights below. On my desk sat 2 photographs, one of the 3 of us laughing at the anniversary ceremony, and next to it, an old photo of our parents, standing in front of the little blue house with the white picket fence. 2 photos, 2 generations, 2 very different stories, but one unbreakable thread connecting them: the enduring power of forgiveness and love. "We found our way back," I whispered, a promise to those who were gone and to those of us still standing.